The story begins not with a map, but with the absence of one. Imagine looking down on Earth from space, yet instead of the familiar shorelines and continents we know today, you see a very different planet. It is the closing chapters of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, and the world is locked in a deep freeze. Vast ice sheets sprawl across much of the northern hemisphere, towering miles high, glittering like frozen mountain ranges stretching into the horizon. The seas are hundreds of feet lower than they are now because trillions of gallons of water are locked away in that ice. This shift in sea level has rewritten the geography of the planet. Places that today are drowned beneath the ocean's waves are exposed as wind-swept plains, rocky highlands, and sweeping river valleys. Island chains that are now separated by wide expanses of ocean are instead connected by dry land. What we think of as permanent coastlines are nothing more than temporary boundaries in a constantly shifting story, and in the far north, where Siberia brushes the edge of Alaska, there is no narrow strait choked by icy water. Instead, there is a sprawling landmass, the size of a small continent, linking Asia to North America. This is the land bridge. In our modern minds, land bridge might conjure the image of a narrow strip of earth, a thin trail across an ocean gap, but this ancient connection was anything but small. It stretched hundreds of miles from north to south, and more than 1,000 miles from east to west. It was a world of its own, a place where steppe grasslands rolled toward distant mountains, where herds of mammoth and bison grazed under the pale light of an Arctic sun. Here, predators stalked the icy winds, giant short-faced bears, packs of wolves and saber-toothed cats, and somewhere among them, small bands of humans moved silently across the snow, carrying with them tools, fire, and stories. The land bridge's very existence reshaped the fate of our species. It served not just as a physical connection between two continents, but as a corridor for migration, trade, and cultural exchange. Without it, the peopling of the Americas might have been delayed by millennia, or might never have happened at all. It was a gateway, a lifeline, and in many ways the first great global highway. But here is where the contrast begins. The map of human history we have been taught is simple. The land bridge emerged during the Ice Age, people crossed it from Asia into the Americas, and then it vanished beneath the waves when the ice melted. This is the story repeated in textbooks and classrooms, reinforced by museum exhibits and animated documentaries. Yet beneath this neat and tidy explanation lies a deeper, more complex truth, one that many researchers are only beginning to grasp. For centuries, the land bridge was treated as an almost mythical concept. The first European explorers to sail into the Bering Strait in the 18th century noticed its narrowness and speculated about a former connection. Later, geologists confirmed that such a link was indeed possible during times of lower sea levels. Archaeologists then built migration models around this idea, using it to explain the origins of the first Americans. But as scientific tools advanced, sonar mapping, radiocarbon dating, ancient DNA analysis, the evidence began to tell a story that did not always match the official narrative. Some findings suggest the land bridge may have existed for far longer than previously believed, perhaps allowing multiple waves of migration in both directions, not just one. Others point to the possibility that human presence in the Americas predates the supposed opening of the migration corridor, hinting that the land bridge might have been part of an even older global network of movement. Still others question whether this lost world was merely a pass-through zone, or if it was a thriving homeland for people who lived and died there for generations. And then there is the matter of what lies beneath the water today. Modern oceanographers and underwater archaeologists have mapped submerged valleys, ancient river channels, and elevated plateaus where the land bridge once stood. Some of these features show patterns that look suspiciously like the work of human hands, though mainstream scholars caution against reading too much into such shapes. After all, nature has a way of carving patterns that mimic architecture. Yet the tantalizing possibility remains: what if settlements, camps, or even monumental structures lie hidden under the cold, dark waters of the Bering Sea? The loss of the land bridge was not a slow fade into obscurity. Around 11,000 years ago, as the Ice Age ended, the Earth's climate began to shift dramatically. Temperatures rose, glaciers retreated, and the oceans surged upward. At first, the flooding may have been gradual, year by year, century by century. But some researchers believe there were sudden pulses of sea level rise, catastrophic events where entire coastlines disappeared in a matter of days or weeks. If such events struck the land bridge, they would have forced its human and animal inhabitants to flee, abandoning a homeland they could never return to. For the people who once walked across this vast plain, the drowning of the land bridge would have been more than just a geographic loss. It would have been the erasure of an entire world, their hunting grounds, their migration routes, their sacred places. Oral traditions passed down among indigenous peoples in Alaska, Canada, and Siberia still speak of a time when the sea swallowed the land, forcing their ancestors to move to higher ground. These stories, often dismissed as myth, might in fact be ancient memories of real events. And so in this documentary, we will walk both paths: the well-lit road of established history and the shadowed trail of hidden truth. We will examine the geological data, the archaeological digs, the genetic clues, and we will listen to the voices of those whose traditions preserve what the sea has taken. Along the way, we will confront the limits of what we know and the possibilities of what we have yet to discover. The map of our world has changed countless times, but the forces that shaped the land bridge still shape our planet today. Climate shifts, rising seas, and human migration are not relics of the past. They are the ongoing story of Earth itself. The land bridge is gone, but its legacy is written in our DNA, our myths, and perhaps in ruins lying silent beneath the waves. As we begin our journey, remember this: the borders we see on maps are illusions. The true boundaries of human history are drawn not by politics or modern geography, but by the shifting dance of land, sea, and time. And somewhere beneath the cold waters between Siberia and Alaska lies the ghost of a world that once connected two continents, and in doing so connected us all. When most people imagine the Ice Age land bridge, they picture a narrow ribbon of dirt crossing a cold, dark ocean, but in truth, it was something far grander, a landscape that would have seemed endless to the people and animals who roamed it. To understand how it formed and why it vanished, we must step into the realm of deep time and the restless forces that sculpt our planet's surface. The story begins with the ice itself. For tens of thousands of years, enormous ice sheets covered much of North America, northern Europe, and Asia. These glaciers acted like frozen mountains, pressing down on the continents with unimaginable weight. At the same time, so much water was locked up in ice that the oceans around the world dropped by more than 300 feet. Where today waves churn and currents swirl, dry land stretched to the horizon, continental shelves, the shallow edges of continents, became vast open plains exposed to wind, rain, and snow. One of the most dramatic examples of this transformation lay in the far north. A broad swath of land connecting Siberia to Alaska, now submerged beneath the Bering Sea. Scientists call it Beringia, and it was not just a bridge but a subcontinent in its own right, larger than modern-day Texas and California combined. It stretched from the Lena River in eastern Russia to the Mackenzie River in Canada's Yukon, encompassing tundra, steppe, and even patches of boreal forest. The mainstream scientific explanation is straightforward. Lower sea levels exposed the continental shelf between Asia and North America, creating a natural corridor for migration. The bridge appeared during glacial periods, and disappeared during warmer interglacials. According to this view, the last and most famous exposure occurred between about 30,000 and 11,000 years ago, peaking during the last glacial maximum before being drowned by rising seas at the dawn of the Holocene. But the evidence, when examined closely, suggests a more complicated history. Geological surveys reveal that Beringia may have persisted far longer than the narrow window usually given in textbooks. Sediment cores taken from the seafloor show layers of soil, pollen, and plant remains, records of a landscape that supported life for tens of thousands of years without interruption. This has led some researchers to argue that Beringia remained partially above water even during warmer periods, acting as a permanent bridge rather than a temporary one. The difference between these two scenarios is enormous. In the first, the land bridge is a fleeting opportunity, a brief moment when migration was possible before the path vanished forever. In the second, it is a constant feature of Ice Age geography, a place where people and animals could move freely over long stretches of time or even settle permanently. Understanding Beringia's geography is not just about drawing lines on a map, it's about reconstructing a living, breathing world. Imagine standing on the highest ridges, looking out over endless plains. To the south, snow-fed rivers carved valleys through the steppe. To the north, sea ice stretched into the Arctic horizon. Herds of caribou and bison grazed across the open grasslands, their movements followed by wolves, foxes, and the occasional lion. The climate, though cold, was surprisingly stable compared to the chaos of the glaciated continents. In many ways, Beringia was a refuge, sheltering life from the extreme swings of Ice Age weather. Today, much of this ancient world lies beneath up to 150 feet of frigid seawater. Mapping it is no easy task. The Bering Sea is notorious for its rough weather, powerful currents, and seasonal ice cover. But advances in sonar technology have given scientists the ability to see the drowned landscape in remarkable detail. High-resolution bathymetric maps reveal the traces of ancient river systems, their channels still visible under layers of sediment. Ridges and plateaus stand like ghostly mountain ranges beneath the waves. It is here that the contrast between accepted science and more speculative theories becomes most intriguing. Mainstream geologists interpret these features as the natural product of erosion, glacial meltwater, and shifting sea levels. But some independent researchers argue that certain formations show geometric patterns, straight lines, right angles, and symmetrical shapes that may hint at human influence. Could parts of Beringia have been modified by the people who lived there? Could there have been structures now buried under silt and sea? The official answer is cautious. There is no definitive proof of ancient architecture beneath the Bering Sea. Yet the possibility is difficult to dismiss entirely. We know from other parts of the world, Doggerland in Europe, the Sunken Shelf in Southeast Asia, that human settlements can and do vanish beneath the sea, leaving behind traces that only modern technology can detect. If similar sites existed on Beringia, they would be extraordinarily difficult to find given the depth, temperature, and harshness of the environment. One of the most fascinating aspects of Beringia's geography is how it acted as both a barrier and a bridge. While it connected Asia and North America, it also isolated the plants and animals within it. Certain species evolved unique adaptations to its conditions, creating a distinct ecological zone unlike any other on Earth at the time. For migrating humans, this meant both opportunity and challenge. The land offered rich hunting grounds, but it also required new survival strategies. And then there's the question of how Beringia fits into the larger pattern of Ice Age geography. It was not the only land connection created by low sea levels. The Sunda and Sahul shelves connected Southeast Asia to Australia. Doggerland linked Britain to mainland Europe. Even between Japan and Korea, dry land replaced what are now ocean straits. These bridges were not isolated anomalies. They were part of a global reshaping of coastlines that fundamentally altered how humans and animals moved across the planet. Yet Beringer stands apart in scale, duration, and significance. It was not just a link between two continents, it was the meeting place of two great migration streams, the stage for one of the most transformative movements in human history. Understanding its geography is key to understanding how our species spread, adapted, and ultimately thrived in some of the harshest environments on Earth. As we leave this section, the outline of the lost world becomes clearer. Beringia was vast, varied, and vibrant. It was not simply a path across the ocean, but a land in its own right, a place that shaped the destiny of countless species, including our own. But to truly grasp its importance, we must now turn to the people who walked it, who they were, where they came from, and how their journey would change the course of history. The land bridge was not just a silent plain of wind and ice, it was a crossroads, an open gate between two worlds, and eventually people walked through that gate. The question is when, and in how many waves did they do it? The traditional story is simple, almost too simple. Around 15,000 years ago, give or take, small groups of hunter-gatherers in Siberia followed herds of game across the exposed Bering Land Bridge into what is now Alaska. From there they trickled down through an ice-free corridor between massive glaciers into the heart of North America. Within a few thousand years, their descendants had spread across both American continents, from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America. This version of events is elegant. It ties together the disappearance of the land bridge, the appearance of distinctive Clovis spear points in the archaeological record, and the genetic ancestry of modern indigenous peoples in the Americas. For decades, it has been the consensus view, printed in textbooks, repeated in documentaries, and presented in museum dioramas, but beneath its neat surface, this story has cracks. The first problem is timing. Archaeological evidence from sites like Monte Verde in Chile, the Buttermilk Creek complex in Texas, and Bluefish Caves in the Yukon suggests that humans were in the Americas thousands of years earlier than the supposed 15,000 year migration date. At Monte Verde, preserved plant remains and tools point to a human presence at least 18,500 years ago. Bluefish Caves, with butchered animal bones, could push the date back to 24,000 years or more. These dates are not minor adjustments, they challenge the very framework of the land bridge migration model. If people were already in South America thousands of years before the ice-free corridor opened, they must have arrived by another route. This leads to the coastal migration theory, which suggests that early humans traveled along the Pacific coast using boats or walking beaches now drowned beneath post-Ice Age seas. The land bridge in this scenario was not the sole gateway but one of several routes into the Americas. The second problem is diversity, both cultural and genetic. Ancient DNA studies have revealed that the earliest Americans were not a single homogeneous population. While most indigenous groups in the Americas trace a portion of their ancestry to Northeast Asian populations, there are genetic signals, faint but persistent, that point to complex mixing with other groups. In some cases, these genetic traces resemble lineages from Southeast Asia, Australasia, or even ancient Europe. The most famous and controversial example of this is the 9,000-year-old Kennewick man, whose skeletal features sparked debate over whether he represented a broader range of ancestral variation than previously thought. Mainstream scientists explain these genetic and morphological anomalies as natural variation within the founding population. Others suggest a more provocative possibility that multiple waves of migration separated by thousands of years arrived via the land bridge or coastal routes, bringing different tool traditions, languages, and genes. If true, this would mean the peopling of the Americas was not a single dramatic crossing but a long, complicated process with many actors and starting points. And then there is the question of whether migration was one way. We tend to imagine people moving from Asia into the Americas and never looking back. Yet the geography of Beringia, as we explored in the last section, makes it equally plausible that movement flowed in both directions. Hunters could have crossed in search of game, traders could have exchanged goods, and families could have moved back and forth over generations. Genetic studies of ancient Siberian populations hint at just such exchanges, with lineages appearing on both sides of the former land bridge. If we could stand on the shores of Beringia during the height of the last ice age, we might see this movement in action. To the west, reindeer herders from Siberia would be following the great herds into the interior. To the east, small bands from Alaska would be moving toward better hunting grounds. Camps of skin tents might dot the valleys, smoke curling into the sky. The air would be filled with the calls of waterfowl, the distant rumble of migrating caribou, and the laughter of children playing on the frozen banks of ancient rivers. Of course, not all archaeologists agree on this vision. For some, the evidence is still too thin to rewrite the migration narrative. The earliest secure archaeological sites in Alaska and the Yukon do date to roughly the same period as the traditional model suggests, 15,000 to 14,000 years ago, and many see no need to complicate the picture. The earlier dates from sites like Monte Verde or Bluefish Caves, critics argue, may reflect errors in dating or natural processes mistaken for human activity. Yet the more we look, the more those early hints accumulate. In caves, in buried riverbeds on windswept terraces, archaeologists have found scattered traces of stone tools and hearths that do not fit neatly into the established timeline. Even more intriguing are sites now submerged along the ancient coastline, places that were dry land during the Ice Age but have been hidden under the ocean for millennia. Advances in underwater archaeology may soon reveal whether these drowned landscapes hold the missing chapters of the migration story. Adding to the mystery is the persistence of oral traditions among indigenous peoples that speak of ancient journeys not from the west, but from the south, the east, and even the sea. While these stories are not treated as scientific evidence in the strictest sense, they often align in surprising ways with archaeological and genetic findings. A few even seem to preserve memories of landscapes that no longer exist, coastal plains swallowed by the ocean, or inland valleys buried beneath ice. The contrast here is striking. The textbook version of the first people's arrival is linear. One land bridge, one migration, one corridor south. The emerging picture is more like a braided river, many channels of movement, some starting earlier, some later, some reversing direction, and all eventually converging to populate two vast continents. The stakes for this debate are not purely academic. The story of the first peoples is deeply tied to questions of identity, heritage, and the rightful place of indigenous voices in the telling of history. For many native communities, the migration narrative has long been imposed from outside, often without regard for their own traditions and histories. As new evidence challenges the old models, there is an opportunity, perhaps a responsibility, to bring those voices into the center of the conversation. By the end of this section, the once clear image of the land bridge as a single brief gateway has dissolved into something richer and more complex. We see now that it may have been crossed many times by many peoples, over tens of thousands of years. We begin to suspect that some of these journeys are missing from the record entirely, hidden beneath ice, water, or simply the erosion of time. And this leads us naturally to the next chapter. If people truly lived and moved across the land bridge for generations, what kind of world did they inhabit? What did they eat, hunt, and fear? What creatures shared that cold, open plain with them? To answer that, we must step into the Ice Age ecosystem of Beringia, a place as rich in life as it was in mystery. To understand the world the first peoples encountered, we must set aside the modern image of the Arctic as a barren wasteland of ice and snow. During the height of the last ice age, the land bridge, Beringia, was not a frozen, lifeless expanse. It was a living landscape, full of movement, sound, and survival. The winds could be harsh, the winters long, but this was no empty frontier. It was a biological crossroads where life from two continents mingled. The climate of Beringia was cold, but paradoxically drier than the surrounding glaciated regions. While massive ice sheets covered much of North America and northern Europe, Beringia itself remained largely ice-free. This was thanks to low precipitation and the region's position between the high-pressure systems of Siberia and Alaska. The result was a steppe, tundra ecosystem, something scientists call the mammoth steppe, stretching across much of the far north. This habitat was a mosaic of grasslands, shrublands, and scattered patches of forest, capable of supporting a surprising diversity of plants and animals. In summer, the plains were alive with wild flowers, mosses, and hardy grasses. Rivers swelled with meltwater, attracting great flocks of migratory birds. Herds of caribou and bison grazed on the open steppe, their movements shaping the landscape as they migrated between seasonal pastures. Giant mammoths, towering creatures with long, curved tusks, moved slowly across the land, using their weight to break through snow in search of food. Steppe horses, musk oxen, and even camels roamed freely, descendants of species that had evolved in North America and crossed into Asia long before. And where there were grazers, there were predators. Packs of dire wolves followed the herds, their larger bodies and stronger jaws adapted for taking down big prey. Saber-toothed cats and scimitar cats stalked the river valleys, their long teeth gleaming in the low sun. The massive short-faced bear, taller than any living bear when it reared up, ruled the open plains, able to chase down prey with terrifying speed. Arctic foxes, wolverines, and golden eagles scoured the land for smaller quarry. For humans living here, this was a land of both abundance and danger. Meat, hides, and bones were plentiful, but so were predators and the risks of the elements. The people who crossed Beringia had to understand its rhythms, when the herds would pass, when the rivers would flood, when storms would sweep in from the north. They needed tools not just for hunting, but for survival in a place where shelter was scarce and the wind could strip heat from the body in minutes. The mainstream reconstruction of this ecosystem is based on a combination of fossil evidence, pollen analysis, and animal remains found in permafrost. We can see what plants grew, what animals lived, and how they interacted, but there are anomalies, small clues that don't quite fit the established picture. For example, certain pollen samples from ancient Beringian soils suggest the presence of tree species far north of their modern range, hinting at pockets of warmer microclimates or unusual weather patterns. Some animal remains appear in places where they should not exist according to standard models, like mastodons in areas thought too cold for them, or marine mammals far inland. These out-of-place finds raise the possibility that Beringia's environment may have been more varied and perhaps more hospitable to humans than previously thought. Even more curious are a few scattered reports from permafrost excavations of bones that appear to bear marks inconsistent with natural predation, possible signs of human modification at dates far earlier than the accepted migration timeline. While such claims remain controversial, they fuel the argument that people may have lived in Beringia for far longer than mainstream archaeology currently recognizes. And then there is the enduring question, was Beringia merely a bridge, or was it also a homeland? Some researchers propose that it may have served as a long-term refuge for both humans and animals during the height of glaciation, a place where populations could survive until conditions improved. In this Beringian standstill model, people might have lived on the land bridge for thousands of years, adapting to its environment before eventually dispersing into the Americas. If true, the human story of Beringia is not one of a fleeting crossing, but of deep-rooted habitation. In this context, the land bridge becomes something more than a corridor. It becomes a shared stage where the fates of species intertwined. Imagine a hunting party stalking a herd of bison at dawn, their breath visible in the frigid air. The ground crunches under their boots as they approach, careful to stay downwind. Overhead, ravens circle, waiting for the hunt's outcome. In the distance, mammoths stand watch over their young, wary of both wolves and humans. Each decision, whether to pursue, to wait, to move camp, could mean the difference between life and death in such a finely balanced ecosystem. The Ice Age ecosystem of Beringia was not static. It shifted with the seasons and over centuries. When temperatures dropped, grasslands expanded. When they rose, shrubs and trees crept in. Rivers carved new channels, lakes formed and drained, and storms reshaped the coastline. For the people living there, adaptability was the key to survival. Tools had to be repaired, clothing had to be suited to sudden weather changes, and food had to be stored for the lean months when herds migrated far away. From a distance of millennia, we can reconstruct much of this world, but there will always be gaps. Bones and pollen can tell us what was there, but not what it felt like. The smell of the grasses, the sting of the wind, the sound of a mammoth's call across the plain. These are details lost to time except, perhaps, in the oral traditions of peoples whose ancestors walked that land. In the accepted scientific narrative, Beringia's ecosystem is a backdrop, a stage upon which the drama of human migration played out. But if we step closer, the line between backdrop and actor begins to blur. The ecosystem didn't just host human journeys, it shaped them. It determined where people could go, what they could eat, and how they could live. And in turn, humans shaped the ecosystem through hunting, fire, and movement across the land. As we move forward in our story, the land bridge's vibrant world begins to fade. The climate is warming, the great ice sheets are melting, rivers swell beyond their banks, and the sea begins its slow, relentless rise. In the next chapter, we will follow the land bridge beneath the waves into a drowned world where the ghosts of valleys, rivers, and perhaps even human camps lie hidden under the cold waters of the Bering Sea. Today, when you stand on the shores of western Alaska or eastern Siberia and look across the Bering Strait, you see only water, gray, cold, restless. On most days, the horizon blurs into low clouds, and the sea is choked with drifting ice. It is difficult to imagine that, in the blink of geological time, this stretch was once dry land, rolling plains, winding rivers, and perhaps even human settlements, stretching unbroken from one continent to the other. The drowning of Beringia was not a single cataclysm, but a long, drawn-out transformation that unfolded over thousands of years. Yet, for the people and animals who called it home, certain moments must have felt catastrophic. As the Ice Age waned and glaciers melted, global sea levels rose. Meltwater poured into the oceans from retreating ice sheets in North America and Eurasia. At first, the water crept in slowly, river mouths pushed inland, marshes turned into bays, but then came the pulses, periods of rapid rise, likely triggered by collapsing ice dams, and the sudden release of vast glacial lakes. In those surges, entire stretches of coastline could vanish within a human lifetime. Geologists call this process transgression, the sea advancing over the land. For those who lived through it, it meant far more than a technical term. It was the loss of hunting grounds, the disappearance of sacred landmarks, the breaking of trails that had guided generations. Families may have been forced to move again and again, abandoning campsites, burial grounds, and stories rooted in place. Echoes of these upheavals still linger in indigenous oral traditions across the Arctic, tales of lands swallowed by the sea, and of migrations made to escape the encroaching waters. Today, that drowned world lies beneath as much as 150 feet, 45 meters of water. The Bering Sea is a hostile place for exploration, one of the roughest, coldest, and most unpredictable bodies of water on Earth. Storms rise without warning, currents drag even expert divers into peril, and sea ice grinds the surface for much of the year. Yet, despite these challenges, scientists have begun to map the seafloor where Beringia once stretched. Using ship-mounted sonar, they send pulses of sound into the depths, recovering ghostly images, the twisting courses of ancient rivers, the ridges of old hills, the sunken basins of long-vanished lakes. Among the most striking discoveries are remnants of vast river systems that once drained the land bridge into both the Pacific and Arctic Oceans. Where valleys widened into floodplains, some researchers speculate, human camps may have clustered just as they did along other Ice Age rivers. Mainstream science interprets these features as natural landscapes, shaped by erosion, sediment, and meltwater. Yet, in sonar maps, certain anomalies spark debate: straight lines, right angles, symmetrical shapes. Are these merely geological coincidences, or could they hint at the foundations of human construction now buried beneath the sea? So far, no confirmed human structures have been recovered. The obstacles are immense: layers of silt hide possible artifacts, the cold erodes what might survive, and the sea itself makes sustained exploration perilous. Still, intriguing hints persist. Fishing trawlers and dredging operations have occasionally brought up objects from the seabed: worked bone, stone tools that fit no known tradition, clusters of rocks that look arranged rather than scattered. Often dismissed as out of place or coincidental, they nonetheless pose the same question: how much of Beringia's story is still hidden offshore? Cores drilled from the seafloor provide another perspective, preserving microscopic records of Beringia's transformation. In one layer lie the pollens of grasses and tundra flowers, in the next, the plankton of an encroaching sea. These sharp transitions mark the very moment the ocean claimed the land. Mainstream accounts see this as the inevitable outcome of climate change and glacial retreat. Alternative theories, still controversial, suggest cataclysms may have hastened the flood: meteor strikes, volcanic eruptions, sudden shifts in ocean currents. While evidence for these remains thin, they reflect the enduring fascination with the idea that Beringia's end was as dramatic as its life. The drowned valleys and ridges are more than geology; they hold the possibility of connecting science with memory. If humans once lived on those riverbanks, their remains, tools, hearths, even burials, may still lie beneath the silt. Such finds could confirm the Beringia's standstill hypothesis, which proposes that people lived on the land bridge for thousands of years before dispersing into the Americas. They could also reveal ties across the Pacific hinted at in DNA and indigenous oral traditions. For now, those secrets remain sealed underwater. But technology is advancing. Autonomous underwater vehicles (AUVs) now map the seabed in high resolution, while remotely operated vehicles (ROVs) can hover just above the bottom, collecting samples and images. Exploration is intensifying, and with it, the chance that fragments of lost lives will be found. Standing at the modern coastline, waves at your feet, the sea feels like a wall, but for most of human history, it was the opposite. The ocean was lower, the land broader, the path between continents open, the waters before you hide, not just a land bridge, but the memory of a world, and perhaps the traces of people who once walked there. Which brings us to the next layer of the story, not the science of sonar or pollen, but the stories and memories carried forward by those whose ancestors saw that land with their own eyes. Across Siberia, Alaska, and beyond, there are myths of a world swallowed by the sea, fragments of a lost Beringia, preserved in words. Long before sonar beams swept the floor of the Bering Sea, before oceanographers traced riverbeds buried beneath silt, there were other maps not of paper or pixels, but of memory, song, and story. Across the Arctic and subarctic, among the indigenous peoples of Siberia, Alaska, and the Canadian North, Tales endure that speak of a time when the sea was not where it is today, when land stretched wide and open, linking worlds now separated by water. These stories do not begin in the language of science. They speak instead in the imagery of lived experience. Hunters walking far out toward the horizon across a plain that is now open sea, a sacred mountain whose base lies drowned offshore, its summit barely breaking the waves. A low-lying forest where the spirits of ancestors still dwell beneath restless water. The tellers may not call this place Beringia, but the landscapes they describe are unmistakably the same. For much of modern history, Western scholars dismissed such accounts as myth in the narrow sense, fictions, symbolic but not factual. Yet in recent decades, anthropologists, linguists, and archaeologists have begun to listen more carefully. They have found that many oral traditions carry precise environmental details, encoded in metaphor, preserved in sacred narrative, that align with geological evidence. Take the Inupiat of northern Alaska. In their traditions, the ocean once lay far beyond sight, the shore marked not by surf and cliffs but by rolling tundra. In some accounts, the rising of the sea is not abstract, but a witnessed event. The sea came forward, one elder recalled, and the animals moved away with it. Repeated across multiple voices, such phrasing may preserve living memories of post-glacial sea level rise, carried orally across thousands of years. On the Siberian side, the Chukchi and Yukagir tell of journeys across the great land to the other side. In some versions, these were seasonal crossings, hunters following herds across frozen plains, returning when the seasons shifted. In others, they were one-way migrations, driven by hunger, cold, or the encroaching sea. Their descriptions, treeless expanses, broad marshes alive with birds, mammoth and caribou grazing in the distance, echo closely what science now reconstructs of Ice Age Beringia. What is striking is how these traditions weave the natural and the supernatural. A drowned valley may be the dwelling of sea spirits. The vanishing of land, a punishment for human arrogance. The shape of the earth, the work of a giant animal moving beneath it. For science, such imagery can seem opaque, but precisely because the stories are sacred, they endured. By embedding memory in myth, ancient storytellers ensured that knowledge of changing land and water would not fade, but be passed down with reverence. Linguistics adds another layer. Comparative studies of indigenous languages in Siberia and the Americas reveal shared words, terms for tools, animals, and landscapes that suggest prolonged contact in a common homeland. Some describe features no longer visible today, words for wide plain or river that runs to the sunset, that match no geography in the modern Arctic. These linguistic fossils may be echoes of Beringia itself. For indigenous elders, the recognition of deep time in their stories is no surprise. It is affirmation. We have always known where we came from. One Siberian elder told an anthropologist, "The land bridge is in our stories. It is in the way we speak. You are only now finding it with your machines." The contrast between traditional and scientific perspectives is not necessarily conflict, but difference in emphasis. Science counts centimeters of sea rise per year. Oral tradition speaks of families moving camp as birds migrated overhead. Together they form a fuller truth, one measured in data, the other in human experience. In some cases, stories even serve as guides for research. A tale of a mountain in the sea aligns with a submerged volcanic peak off the Chukchi coast. A story of a river of fish flowing between two lands mirrors sonar, images of a vanished channel linking Beringian lakes to the Pacific. These correlations are not proof, but they are compelling hints that memory, carried in story, can bridge the gap between myth and fact. Yet elders caution against treating these traditions only as raw data for Western science. They are not merely records of events. They are living foundations of identity, morality, and worldview. The drowning of Beringia is remembered not only as geology, but as a lesson in fragility, a reminder of the need to live in balance with the world. That lesson resonates today. The parallels are sobering: the slow encroachment of water, the grief of losing familiar ground, the choice between adaptation and migration. What happened at the close of the Ice Age is happening again, only faster. When we weave together scientific reconstructions with indigenous memory, Beringia emerges as more than a migration corridor or an ecological zone. It was a homeland, a place of spirits and survival, story and change. Its drowning was not only the loss of land, but the transformation of a cultural landscape into memory, and those memories carry us forward, suggesting that the people of Beringia did not vanish into the sea. They adapted, carried their knowledge with them, and left traces far across the Americas, and perhaps beyond. Which brings us to the next chapter of the story, the peopling of the New World. The image of the first Americans has shifted dramatically over the last century. Once, textbooks confidently declared the story began around 13,000 years ago, when small bands of hunters crossed the exposed Bering Land Bridge, slipped south through an ice-free corridor, and spread across the Americas. The evidence seemed neat, the timeline tidy, the so-called Clovis first model. But reality, messy as ever, has proven far more fascinating. New discoveries in archaeology, genetics, and paleoecology now suggest that humans were present in the Americas thousands of years earlier, and that their journeys were not a single one-way march, but a complex, multi-stage migration. The key lies in reframing Beringia, not as a bridge, but as a homeland, a place where people may have lived for millennia, adapting to a unique environment while ice sheets to the south sealed off passage. According to the Beringian standstill hypothesis, groups of ancient humans reached the region from Siberia some 25,000 years ago, then remained isolated until the glaciers retreated. Genetics has been central to this shift. Ancient DNA, studied with the consent and guidance of indigenous communities, shows that most Native American populations descend from a common ancestral group that diverged from East Asians about 23,000 years ago. During that long standstill, their genes accumulated unique markers still linking them to Siberian cousins today. One extraordinary confirmation came from a 12,600-year-old child discovered in Montana, buried with Clovis stone tools. His genome revealed direct ties to all Native American groups, north and south, while also connecting to Siberian populations, a bridge, not of land, but of DNA. Archaeology has added its own surprises. For decades, Clovis sites, marked by their iconic fluted spear points, were the oldest accepted evidence of human presence. But now, older pre-Clovis sites are rewriting the timeline. In Chile's Monte Verde, artifacts date back at least 14,500 years, evidence that people reached South America long before the ice-free corridor existed. In Texas, the Buttermilk Creek complex yielded thousands of tools more than 2 millennia older than Clovis. Together, these sites point toward an earlier coastal migration. During the Ice Age, much of the Pacific Northwest was icebound, but further south, stretches of coastline remained open, rich with marine life, corridors for seafarers or shoreline travelers. If Beringia's people were skilled in both land and sea, as evidence suggests, they may have followed the Pacific edge, moving swiftly south well before inland routes opened. Archaeologists now speak of maritime Beringians, boat builders and coastal foragers, whose adaptability carried them across vast frontiers. Layered atop this are echoes from indigenous oral histories across the Americas. Many speak of long journeys from the north, of rivers and coasts guiding ancestral movements. For communities who hold these traditions, the scientific confirmation of deep northern ancestry is not revelation, but recognition. We have always known, many elders say. Our stories carried this truth. Yet scholars caution, these accounts are not mere data to be mined, they are living traditions with meanings rooted in culture and spirit. When combined respectfully with archaeological and genetic findings, however, These stories give the peopling of the Americas a richer, more human dimension. The narrative that emerges is not of a single file line trudging south, but of a tapestry of movements, some groups lingering in the north, others moving swiftly along coasts, still others pushing deep into South America within a few millennia. Early sites show remarkable diversity, tools, diets, settlement patterns, all signs of rapid adaptation and constant innovation. Hints even suggest human presence in the Yukon's Bluefish Caves as far back as 24,000 years ago, placing people on the continent at the very edge of the last glacial maximum. The story of the first Americans is, at its heart, one of endurance and ingenuity. It is also a reminder of how fragile our narratives can be when built on incomplete evidence. For most of the 20th century, Clovis first reigned because it was simple, elegant, and supported by what was known. But older sites and the revolution of ancient DNA have shattered that simplicity. The new vision transforms Beringia from a fleeting passage into a prolonged chapter in human history, a crucible where cultures adapted, identities formed, and the foundations for two continents were laid. And yet, the land bridge's story does not end there. The very forces that once allowed people to cross, glacial cycles, sea level change, shifting climates, would eventually erase it. Solid ground gave way to cold, turbulent sea. But before that final drowning, Beringia witnessed one last flourish of Ice Age life, a golden age when humans and megafauna shared its vast plains. That is where our next chapter begins. Beringia, during the late Pleistocene, was no frozen wasteland. Far from the image of an inhospitable ice-choked desert, it was a sprawling steppe tundra stretching for thousands of kilometers, a vast windswept grassland supporting one of the most diverse and abundant megafaunal communities on Earth. Imagine a land where herds of mammoth and bison grazed alongside wild horses, musk oxen, and caribou, while predators, scimitar-toothed cats, giant short-faced bears, and packs of dire wolves prowled the open plains. This mammoth steppe was unique, stretching from Western Europe across Siberia into Alaska and the Yukon. Its secret was simple: a cold, dry climate and nutrient-rich soils that produced endless grasses and sedges, perfect fuel for grazing herds, perfect terrain for hunters. For humans, Beringia was both a land of abundance and danger. Large game provided meat, hides, and bone, but hunting them demanded coordination, strategy, and courage. Mammoths, towering more than 3 meters high and weighing up to 6 tons, could kill as easily as be killed. Archaeological evidence from Siberia and Alaska shows signs of mammoth butchery, proof that Beringia's hunters developed cooperative strategies, perhaps driving prey into bogs or ambush points. The woolly mammoth, iconic symbol of the Ice Age, was not alone. Woolly rhinoceroses roamed western Beringia, though they never crossed into the Americas. Bison antiquus, larger than today's bison, thundered across the plains in massive herds, reshaping the land as they grazed. Wild horses, once central to the food web, sustained both predators and people, until their American lineage vanished forever. And the predators were formidable. Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, was built for pursuit, a deadly runner with long curved fangs. Arctodus simius, the short-faced bear, could rear up over 4 meters tall, perhaps the most fearsome land predator of its age. Dire wolves, larger and heavier than modern wolves, hunted in packs, testing the weak, the young, and the old. To survive here, humans needed more than weapons. They needed intimate knowledge of the land. They tracked migrations, read the seasons, and anticipated the movements of herds. Winter's long nights and brutal cold brought hardship, but also frozen rivers, new highways for travel and hunting. Summer's endless daylight offered abundance, time to gather, hunt, and prepare for the lean months ahead. For many indigenous traditions, these animals were not merely prey, but kin, beings with spirit, agency, and reciprocal relationships with humans. This worldview shaped rituals, taboos, and hunting practices. It reminds us that Beringia's story is not only ecological, but spiritual, an entanglement of people, animals, and land. Yet, even the giants of the steppe lived on borrowed time. As the Ice Age waned, warming climates fractured their ecosystem. Moisture increased, shrubs, then forests, began to spread. Rich grasslands gave way to less nutritious plants, and humans, growing in number, expanding in reach, added new pressures. Whether through hunting, habitat change, or competition, people became a decisive force in the fate of these species. The extinctions came swiftly. By around 10,000 years ago, mammoths, wild horses, short-faced bear, and scimitar cats had vanished from Beringia. A few mammoths lingered on isolated Arctic islands, but the age of giants was over. In their place came moose, brown bears, and the smaller, forest-adapted species we know today. This was more than an ecological shift, it was cultural. For Beringia's people, the disappearance of great beasts meant new tools, new diets, new ways of moving across the land. Hunting changed, fishing, gathering, and smaller game became more vital. Spiritually, too, the loss of animals with such weight in story and tradition must have reshaped cosmologies. And yet, the giants remain. Their bones, locked in permafrost, still emerge as the ice melts. Their memory endures in indigenous oral history. Even science keeps pulling them back into the present. The woolly mammoth's genome has been sequenced, sparking heated debate over de-extinction. Could these creatures return? Should they? For our story, the last age of Beringia's megafauna is both climax and turning point. The land bridge still stretched between continents, but change was unstoppable. Ice sheets retreated, seas began to rise, and slowly, Beringia itself, the great corridor of life, slipped beneath the waves. Only fragments remained, fossil, genetic, and cultural echoes of a world lost to the sea. In our next chapter, we witness that final transformation, the drowning of a continent-spanning corridor, and the severing of the land between Asia and the Americas, a moment when geography itself rewrote human history. The death of Beringia was not a single thunderous catastrophe, it was a slow, relentless drowning. For thousands of years, the land bridge had endured, even at the height of the Ice Age, when so much of Earth's water was locked away in glaciers that sea levels stood more than 100 meters lower than today. It was a stable link between Asia and North America, a place of migration, of trade, of survival. But as the Pleistocene gave way to the Holocene, the climate shifted, ice melted, oceans swelled, and Beringia's fate was sealed. At first, the signs were subtle. Marshes expanded along the low-lying coasts, shallow lakes spread, rivers that once cut deep into the land slowed and widened. To those living there, it may have seemed like little more than seasonal flooding, water that lingered longer each year. But century by century, the sea advanced, claiming more of the plains. The cause lay far away, in the great ice sheets that blanketed continents. As the Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers retreated, their meltwater poured into the oceans. This was not a trickle, it was a flood on a planetary scale. Glacial lakes, swollen with centuries of stored water, sometimes burst in cataclysmic outflows. The result, a steady rise in sea level, a meter or more per century, fast enough to redraw a coastline within a human lifetime. For the people of Beringia, this was more than an environmental shift. It was the unraveling of their world. Fishing camps and river villages saw their shorelines swallowed. Hunting grounds turned to marsh, then shallow bay. Trails and landmarks that had guided generations disappeared beneath the tide. Oral traditions from indigenous peoples speak of the sea coming in, or the land walking away, echoes, perhaps, of this very loss. Geography worked against them. Much of Beringia was a broad, low plain, only tens of meters above sea level. Once the waters began to rise, flooding accelerated. From the north, the Arctic Ocean pressed south. From the south, the Pacific advanced northward. In time, the two fronts met, carving a channel 50 miles wide, the Beringia Strait. That moment marked more than the drowning of a landmass. It marked the end of an age. For tens of thousands of years, animals and humans had crossed freely between continents. Mammoths roamed from Siberia to Alaska. People carried tools, language, and knowledge across an open corridor. Now the sea cut them apart. The connection was gone, replaced by a churning, icy expanse. But the flood did more than divide. It transformed. Where grasslands once stretched, estuaries blossomed. Where mammoths grazed, fish and seals thrived. New marine ecosystems emerged, rich in abundance, demanding that humans adapt. Some followed the herds inland. Others turned to the sea, becoming expert fishers and hunters of marine mammals. Yet the loss of Beringia was also a loss of memory. The land bridge had not been only a highway, it had been a homeland. Archaeology suggests people lived in central Beringia for thousands of years, a distinct population, genetically different from both the Siberians to the west and the North Americans to the east. Some scholars call this the Beringia's standstill, a formative chapter in our species' story. When the sea rose, so too did the risk that this history would be erased. From a scientific perspective, Beringia's drowning was part of a global pattern. Sindaland, in Southeast Asia, was swallowed, leaving only the islands of Indonesia. Doggerland, in the North Sea, vanished, cutting Britain off from Europe. But Beringia's loss was unique. It severed one of Earth's most important migration routes, altering the trajectory of human and animal history forever. To those who lived through it, the experience must have been haunting. Imagine standing on a familiar hilltop, watching the horizon retreat year after year as the sea crept closer. Imagine knowing your children would never hunt on the same plains where you had once tracked mammoths. The land itself was vanishing, slowly but inexorably. Geologists can trace the moment when the Pacific and Arctic met, sometime between 11,000 and 10,000 years ago. Once the strait opened, tidal currents reshaped the region, channels formed, sediments shifted, and within centuries, the mammoth steppe was gone, replaced by the cold, nutrient-rich waters we see today. Yet, in a way, Beringia never fully disappeared. Beneath the waves lie its drowned rivers, its ancient lakebeds, the footprints of those who lived there. Advances in underwater archaeology may one day allow us to rediscover these lost landscapes, and perhaps even the settlements that were swallowed by the tide. The drowning of Beringia was not an ending, it was a transformation into history, into memory, into myth. For indigenous peoples on both sides of the strait, its story endures, alive in oral traditions, carried forward through generations. For scientists, it remains both a puzzle and a revelation, proof that climate, geology, and humanity are forever intertwined. As the waters closed over the last ridges of land, a chapter of Earth's story ended. The mammoth steppe was gone, the great migration route was severed. Two continents, once neighbors, stood divided by an unforgiving sea, and yet the memory of Beringia lives on. When the land bridge vanished beneath the rising seas, it did not erase the people who had called it home. It scattered them. Communities that had once thrived in the heart of Beringia now faced a stark choice: move inland, adapt to the changing coasts, or perish. Those decisions shaped the earliest chapters of human life in the Americas, setting the stage for cultures, migrations, and survival strategies that would echo for millennia. In popular imagination, the first Americans are often depicted as a single wave of migrants streaming into an untouched wilderness. The reality was far more complex. The people who emerged on the American side after the flooding were not newcomers. They were the descendants of Beringia's ancient inhabitants, hardened by generations in the harsh subarctic. When the sea claimed their lowlands, many moved south into Alaska, the Yukon and the interior plains. Others followed the retreating ice along the coast, navigating in skin boats or trekking on foot along ice-free shorelines. The end of Beringia coincided with a broader upheaval. Glaciers retreated, rivers shifted, vast ecosystems transformed, grasslands replaced tundra, forests crept northward. New species appeared to hunt and new challenges to overcome. For the first Americans after the flood, mobility was survival, settlements were temporary, shifting with the seasons and with the migrations of animals. Archaeology at sites like Swan Point in Alaska and Bluefish Caves in the Yukon reveals a culture both rooted and adaptive. Stone tool traditions carried forward from their ancestors, but with innovations suited to the changing landscape. Blades grew more specialized, crafted to hunt smaller, faster prey as mammoths and mastodons dwindled. Fishing gear advanced, signaling a growing reliance on rivers and coasts. Adaptation was not only technological, it was cultural. Oral histories from indigenous nations in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest speak of journeys along the coast of learning to read the sea and sky. Some became expert mariners, traveling in skin-covered kayaks and massive umiaks to hunt seals, walrus, even whales. Others pressed inland, mastering the art of tracking caribou through forested valleys. The diversity of lifeways that emerged after the flooding is a testament to resilience. Yet the loss of Beringia also reshaped connection. Where once the land bridge allowed constant exchange between Asia and America, the sea now stood as a barrier. Contact did not vanish entirely. Evidence suggests some cross-strait travel persisted, but it became rare, dangerous, dependent on seafaring. Isolation deepened. Over time, languages, traditions, and genetic lineages diverge. Southward, new journeys began. Some followed ice-free corridors. Others traveled along what scholars now call the Kelp Highway, a coastal route sustained by the rich marine life of the Pacific Rim. These migrations may have been astonishingly swift, carrying people thousands of miles in only a few centuries, seeding the earliest cultures of Central and South America, but not all left. Some remained near the old homeland. Along the coasts of Alaska and Chukotka, traditions endured, songs, hunting methods, ceremonies, echoes of central Beringia itself. Beringia lived on not as geography, but as memory woven into daily life. From genetics too, the story survives. Indigenous peoples across the Americas carry a distinct signature in their DNA, the Beringian standstill. For thousands of years, their ancestors lived in Beringia, genetically isolated from Asia. When the waters rose, that signature traveled south, etched into the genomes of the first Americans. Knowledge of the lost land may also have endured in story. Across the Arctic and Pacific coast, oral traditions recall land swallowed by the sea, accounts so vivid that some researchers wonder if they are living memories of real events, preserved across thousands of years. The archaeological record confirms adaptation on multiple fronts. At Monte Verde in Chile, dated over 14,000 years ago, we see signs of rapid coastal migration. Inland, the Clovis culture arose, with fluted projectile points designed for hunting megafauna on the plains. Different peoples, different strategies, all descendants of the same vanished homeland. Over time, the shared identity of Beringia fragmented. Cultures grew distinct. In the Arctic, the Dorset and Thule peoples carried forward maritime lifeways, rooted in Beringian heritage. Far to the south, agricultural civilizations rose in fertile valleys, worlds apart from northern hunters, yet linked by ancestry. For modern researchers, reconstructing this post-flood world requires weaving together archaeology, genetics, paleoecology, and oral tradition. The picture that emerges is one not of disappearance, but of transformation. Beringia vanished beneath the sea, but its people endured. They adapted, innovated, spread across two continents. The first Americans after the flood did more than survive. They redefined what it meant to live in a changing world. This was not the end of Beringia's story, it was its evolution. Long after the waves had swallowed Beringia, its memory refused to vanish. The land itself was gone, its plains buried under the icy waters of the Bering Strait, yet echoes of it endured in the stories, songs, and beliefs of its descendants. Across the Arctic and along the Pacific coasts, elders spoke of a time when the sea was not there, when one could walk to lands far away, and when great floods reshaped the earth forever. In many indigenous oral traditions, Beringia appears not as a geographic fact, but as a living memory of transformation. Among the Inupiat of Alaska, tales recall ancestors crossing from the west, walking on dry ground where the sea now runs. In Siberia, Chukchi stories speak of hunters and traders who once traveled eastward, only to see their path swallowed by the ocean. These stories carry themes of loss and separation, but also of survival and adaptation, paralleling the very patterns seen in the archaeological record. What makes them remarkable is their consistency. Across vast distances and diverse cultures, the echoes align. On the coast of British Columbia, First Nations recall villages drowned by the sea, destroyed by a great flood unleashed by a spirit. In Alaska, Yupik traditions describe a time when the shoreline lay far beyond its current reach, when ancient camps, now beneath the waves, stood on dry land. Thousands of miles away in Patagonia, flood myths speak of ancestral lands swallowed by the ocean, a strange resonance that hints at a shared deep-time experience. To modern ears, these stories might sound allegorical, but anthropologists and ethnogeologists have found that oral traditions can preserve accurate memories of real events for thousands of years. These are not mere myths in the sense of fantasy, they are cultural vaults, mnemonic devices encoding survival knowledge, geography, and history. In the case of Beringia, they carry a dual weight, mourning what was lost and celebrating the people's ability to endure. Among the Alutiiq of coastal Alaska, stories speak of a world before the waters came, followed by migrations inland and southward. Elders explain, these are not simply tales for entertainment, but teachings, lessons of adaptability, of cooperation, of respect for the forces of nature. There is also a spiritual dimension. In certain Arctic cosmologies, the sea itself is alive, a being with will and power, capable of giving and taking life. Some versions portray the inundation of Beringia as an act of balance, the ocean reclaiming land after humans had taken too much. Here, the flood is not catastrophe, it is reciprocity. Such perspectives blur the line between myth and memory, raising an extraordinary question: how much of what we call legend is in truth faintly remembered history? Some scholars note striking parallels between Beringian flood stories and distant traditions, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the biblical account of Noah, separated by geography and time, yet united by core motifs: land lost to water, the survival of a remnant, renewal in a changed world. Could these patterns reflect a shared human memory of Ice Age seas rising across the globe? Not all echoes are told in words. Some appear in ritual, in song, in art. Along the Pacific Northwest, ceremonial masks depict beings emerging from the sea, traveling between worlds. In Siberia, certain drum rhythms are said to echo the surf breaking against a long shoreline, perhaps once accompanying migration songs. Even place names, preserved in now vanished languages, may hold whispers of landscapes long drowned. One of the most striking examples comes from Haida Gwaii. Here, oral histories speak of submerged coastal plains once used for hunting and gathering. Modern underwater surveys have confirmed these plains existed, complete with tools and hearths left by their ancient inhabitants, a living bridge between memory and science. For these communities, remembering Beringia was more than nostalgia, it was survival. Stories of vanished ground carried warnings about impermanence, about the dangers of over-reliance, about the need to adapt. Beringia's loss became a cultural compass, pointing not backward, but forward. Today, climate change gives these stories renewed urgency. As rising seas threaten modern coastlines, indigenous elders remind us the lessons embedded in flood stories remain. The memory of Beringia is not only about the past, it is a guide for the present and the future. Some researchers now argue that these oral traditions should be treated as evidence, partners to archaeology. Stories, they suggest, may hold clues to lost rivers, vanished shorelines, and ancient currents. The case of Beringia shows us that memory can be geographical, that human voices can carry maps across 10,000 years. And so a final mystery arises: how long can memory endure? If Beringian flood stories truly reach back over 10,000 years, they may represent one of the longest continuous cultural memories in human history. That would mean the peoples of the Americas are not only descendants of Ice Age explorers, but also inheritors of an unbroken chain of storytelling, from the Pleistocene to the present. In this light, Beringia is not entirely gone. It exists in the mind's eye, in words passed parent to child, in drumbeats, in masks, in the knowledge that the sea has not always been where it is now. The land bridge lies silent beneath the strait, but its presence endures in the cultures that sprang from it. And as we turn to the next chapter, the story moves from memory to discovery, from myth to science, as archaeologists, divers, and marine explorers search for the drowned world of Beringia and for what it can still reveal about humanity's shared Ice Age past. For most of history, the Bering Strait was seen simply as an icy, treacherous expanse of water, a place to be avoided, not explored. But in recent decades, advances in technology have allowed scientists to peer beneath its waves, revealing a submerged world that once teemed with life and carried the footsteps of migration. The process of mapping Beringia has become a global collaboration, blending sonar surveys, sediment analysis, and underwater archaeology to reconstruct a landscape unseen for more than 10,000 years. It begins with the most fundamental tool, bathymetric mapping. Using high-resolution multibeam sonar, scientists send pulses of sound down to the seafloor, measuring the time it takes to return. The result, a detailed 3D image of the ocean bottom, its ridges, valleys, and riverbeds, carved by Ice Age waters long before the flood. On these maps, ancient river channels appear with startling clarity, ghost rivers winding across the submerged shelf, pointing to where humans may once have camped or hunted. Next comes sub-bottom profiling. Low-frequency sound waves penetrate beneath the seafloor, revealing buried soil layers, ancient peat bogs, even tree root systems, the remnants of Beringia's once vast tundra. These layers can be radiocarbon dated, giving precise timelines for when the land bridge was habitable and when it finally disappeared beneath the sea. Among the most astonishing finds, ancient shorelines, now more than 50 meters underwater. These aren't just geological curiosities, they are markers, clues to where people and animals may have lived. Along them, archaeologists search for stone tools, bones, and other cultural traces. Mammoth tusks, caribou antlers, vivid reminders of the megafauna that once roamed this land. But mapping Beringia is not only about structures, it's about climate, ecology, and life itself. Sediment cores drilled from the seabed hold microscopic fossils, pollen grains, diatoms, insect remains. These tiny archives allow scientists to recreate Beringia's vegetation, its seasons, its diversity. From them we know this was no frozen wasteland, it was a patchwork of grassland, shrub tundra, and wetlands, rich enough to sustain both animals and people. The search is not without peril. The Bering Strait is cold, stormy, and ice-covered for much of the year. Visibility for divers is often only a few feet. Strong currents shift sediment, erasing or burying evidence. For this reason, much of the work depends on remotely operated vehicles and autonomous underwater drones, machines fitted with cameras, sampling arms and sensors, turning the seafloor into a mobile laboratory. One of the most ambitious efforts is the Bering Land Bridge National Preserves Mapping Initiative, a collaboration between American, Russian, and Canadian scientists. Despite geopolitical divisions, the scientific community sees Beringia as a shared heritage, and cooperation is essential. Piece by piece, they are revealing migration corridors and settlement zones that once connected continents. What's striking is how these discoveries overturn older assumptions. For much of the 20th century, Beringia was depicted as a frozen, desolate wasteland, no place to linger, only to cross. But the new maps tell another story. Rivers full of fish, fertile plains, sheltered valleys. This was not just a bridge, it was a homeland, a place where people could live for generations before moving deeper into the Americas. And there remains a tantalizing possibility: fully intact sites, still preserved beneath the sediment. Because the sea rose gradually, some settlements may have been slowly abandoned, leaving hearths, tools, even dwellings buried in place. The challenge, of course, is scale. Beringia covered an area the size of Texas. Searching it is an enormous task. Here, satellite technology sharpens the hunt. By combining satellite altimetry with sonar and sub-bottom data, scientists can rewind coastlines, simulating the flood in reverse. This allows them to identify likely settlement zones, targets for future expeditions. Still, researchers caution against over-romanticizing. The ocean is a destructive archive. Much may be lost, scattered, eroded, buried too deep to recover. Yet even in absence, the topography and climate reconstructions matter. They provide context. They reveal the stage on which human history unfolded. And intriguingly, the maps align with another line of evidence: genetics. Studies of indigenous DNA suggest a period of isolation, thousands of years, before migration into the Americas. The valleys and refuges of mapped Beringia may explain where this standstill population lived, bridging the gap between genetics and archaeology. The implications stretch beyond the past. Mapping Beringia reveals how seas reshape coastlines, a lesson with urgent relevance today as climate change accelerates modern sea level rise. To understand how ancient societies adapted or failed to adapt is to glimpse our own possible future. Ultimately, mapping Beringia is like piecing together a puzzle with most of its fragments still missing. Each sonar scan, each sediment core, each artifact adds detail, but the full picture remains elusive. That is its allure. Beringia exists now only in the imagination, half history, half mystery. And as we move forward, the story shifts once again, from sonar and seafloors, to people and memory, from maps and machines, to the voices of those reviving its legacy: scientists, indigenous communities, and storytellers, ensuring that Beringia's memory lives not only in research paper, but in living culture. Long before Beringia became the subject of sonar maps and geological surveys, it lived in songs, oral traditions, and ancestral memory, carried by the people whose heritage spans both sides of the Bering Strait. For indigenous communities in Alaska, Siberia, and the Russian Far East, Beringia is not a lost world, it is an enduring homeland, woven into identity, passed down through countless generations. Today, these communities are joining forces with scientists, historians, and storytellers, ensuring that the land bridge's legacy is preserved in ways that honor both evidence and tradition. The Yupik, Chukchi, and Inupiat peoples speak of migrations, of animal abundance, of ancient camps, echoes that resonate with the archaeological record. Elders recall a time when the sea was lower, when hunters could walk to distant lands now separated by miles of water. Their oral histories describe herds of mammoths, migrations of caribou, vast grasslands, details that align uncannily with modern reconstructions of Beringia's Ice Age ecosystem. Far from mythic fantasy, these narratives may be eyewitness memories, carried across thousands of years. In recent decades, anthropologists and archaeologists have come to recognize these traditions as more than cultural treasure. They are data, vital evidence. Collaborations have formed where indigenous elders guide researchers to promising sites, interpret landscapes, explain wildlife patterns outsiders might overlook. In return, scientists share findings not as abstract academic results, but as pieces of a shared history. One striking example is the Shared Beringian Heritage Program, a U.S.-Russia initiative funding exchanges, joint fieldwork and cultural projects. Through it, indigenous youth have crossed the strait, visiting each other's villages, tracing family connections older than borders. The experience is profound, meeting a distant relative who speaks a different language, yet carries the same stories of migration and subsistence, a living reminder that the Bering Strait once united, rather than divided, peoples. Artists, too, have become guardians of the story. Painters, sculptors, and filmmakers from Alaska to Chukotka imagine mammoth hunts beneath auroras, families setting up skin tents beside Ice Age rivers. These creative works, blending archaeology with legend, keep Beringia alive in the public imagination, reaching audiences far beyond the realm of science. Yet preservation is not only about the past, it is about urgent threats of the present. Climate change is reshaping the Arctic, melting permafrost, eroding coasts, exposing burial grounds and archaeological sites. In some cases, heritage is being lost faster than it can be recorded. Indigenous communities, working with researchers, have launched emergency salvage projects to recover artifacts, oral histories, and ecological knowledge before they disappear. Geopolitics, too, casts its shadow. The Cold War created decades of separation between Alaska Native and Russian indigenous families. Only in the 1990s did regular exchanges resume. Even today, political restrictions can hinder travel and collaboration. For many descendants, reconnecting across the strait remains as much a diplomatic challenge as a logistical one. Education plays a vital role. On Alaska's Seward Peninsula and in Russia's Chukotka region, schools now integrate Beringian history into their curricula, not as a niche subject, but as a foundation of identity. Students learn not only about the land bridge, but about ancestral migrations, subsistence traditions, and languages. These lessons counter the old narrative of Beringia as empty. They affirm what communities have always known: this was and is a homeland. Museums and cultural centers reinforce the same message. The Beringia National Park Visitor Center in Providencia and the Kawarak Cultural Center in Nome showcase artifacts, reconstructions, and oral histories, placing indigenous storytelling beside scientific reconstructions. Different ways of knowing, not in competition, but in harmony. This partnership marks a profound shift. For much of the 20th century, Beringia was described almost exclusively through Western academic lenses, maps, stratigraphy, radiocarbon dates. These were essential tools, but they left out the voices most closely tied to the land. Now the narrative is widening. Oral traditions and science are woven together, creating a richer, truer picture. On joint expeditions, indigenous team members are not assistants, but co-researchers. They identify animal bones, interpret tool use, reconstruct camp layouts, using traditional knowledge of hunting, storage, and shelter. This fusion of perspectives has led to breakthroughs. Bone piles once dismissed as random scatter, for example, are now understood as storage caches, deliberately arranged for survival through long winters. Guardianship extends to politics as well. Indigenous leaders advocate for the protection of cultural and environmental heritage, lobbying against industrial projects that threaten fragile ecosystems or submerged archaeological sites. Protecting Beringia's past often means protecting its living communities today, and most importantly, the story of Beringia did not end 10,000 years ago. For its descendants, the journey is still alive, in family stories, in place names, in seasonal hunts and fishing along ancient rivers. They walk daily in Beringia's footprints. Here lies the deeper truth. Beringia is both science and memory, a migration route and a homeland, a bridge and a meeting place. By preserving both voices, the academic and the ancestral, the guardians of Beringia ensure that future generations inherit not just data, but meaning. And as our journey continues, we step beyond human voices to explore another legacy, the wildlife of Beringia, how its unique ecosystem shaped migration, extinction, and survival, and how echoes of that Ice Age biodiversity still ripple through today's Arctic. When we imagine Beringia during the Ice Age, we often picture endless white plains of snow and ice. But that image is misleading, shaped by today's Arctic. In reality, Beringia was alive, a wind-swept grassland stretching thousands of miles, a mammoth steppe teeming with life, an ecosystem so unique, scientists still debate how it worked. Here, animals that would never share the same habitat today grazed side by side, creating a community unlike anything the world has seen before or since. At its heart stood the woolly mammoth, towering above the grasses, tusks sweeping through the air, reshaping the land much as elephants do in Africa, knocking down shrubs, spreading seeds, opening grazing space for others. Close behind, steppe bison pressed forward, massive shoulders breaking through snow to reach hidden forage. Caribou roamed in vast migratory herds, hooves clicking in unison across the plains. And then came the unfamiliar. The giant short-faced bear, so large it could look down on a basketball hoop. The scimitar-toothed cat, a sleek hunter armed with serrated fangs. The Arctic camel, long vanished, but a reminder that camels first evolved here in North America. The musk ox, now reduced, but once abundant, grazing in great herds across the steppe. Predators thrived in this abundance. Dire wolves pursued bison and caribou across frozen rivers. Foxes and wolverines scavenged from the kills. Above them, snowy owls and gerfalcons patrolled the skies, their sharp eyes searching the tundra. Each species played its part. Together they formed a balance so rich that Beringia supported one of the greatest concentrations of life ever seen in the Arctic. But how was this possible in such a cold world? The secret lay in Beringia's unique environment. Unlike most of the North, it was never buried under massive ice sheets. Its dry, windy climate created nutrient-rich soils where hardy grasses flourished year-round. Herbivores fed, grazed, and kept the land open, preventing forests from spreading, locking the ecosystem into a cycle of abundance. Fossils and frozen carcasses from Siberian permafrost give us a window into this lost world. Some mammoths are so well preserved that skin, hair, even stomach contents remain, revealing diets rich in grasses and wild flowers, still found in Arctic meadows today. But the end came swiftly. As the Ice Age warmed and seas rose, the land bridge sank beneath the Bering Strait. The grasslands gave way to mossy tundra and dark forest. The great herbivores could not adapt, and their predators followed them into extinction. Mammoths, steppe bison, scimitar-toothed cats, all gone, surviving only in isolated pockets, like Wrangel Island, before vanishing forever. And yet, Beringia is not gone. Its echoes remain. Caribou still follow ancient migration paths. Musk oxen still graze the tundra. Arctic foxes still endure the harshest winter. Survivors carrying the legacy of their Ice Age kin. This story is not just about loss. It is about resilience, Some bison and caribou shifted their ranges, adapting to new climates. Others interbred, creating hybrid lineages suited to change. Life in Beringia was never static. It was dynamic, evolving, enduring. For scientists, this is more than prehistory. It is a key to the great question of extinction. Why did so many vanish? Climate change, human hunting, or both? Archaeological sites show our ancestors hunted bison, caribou, even mammoths, leaving open the debate of how much humanity shaped this fate. Today, Beringia's lost world inspires new ideas. Pleistocene rewilding, the attempt to restore ecosystems by reintroducing surviving relatives of extinct species. In Siberia and Alaska, experimental reserves test this theory, bringing back grazing herds to keep grasslands open, studying how the land responds. In doing so, they not only honor Beringia's past, but may also shape the future of conservation. Yet perhaps the most powerful memory of Beringia's wildlife is not in fossils or science, but in story. Indigenous traditions still tell of mammoths breaking through ice, of bison herds stretching to the horizon, of predators stalking campfires. For these communities, the animals are not relics, they are part of a living memory, bound to the land, bound to identity. The wildlife of Beringia is more than a list of extinctions. It is proof of nature's richness, even in the harshest conditions. It is a reminder that ecosystems are both fragile and enduring. And it is a call to value the ancient past, not as a curiosity, but as a guide. As we leave the mammoth steppe behind, our journey shifts once more, this time beneath the waves, to explore Beringia's sunken secrets, the drowned plains at the bottom of the Bering Strait, where untold archaeological and ecological treasures still wait to be discovered. When we look at a map of the modern Arctic, the Bering Strait seems simple, a narrow strip of ocean, a cold divide between Siberia and Alaska. But beneath its icy surface lies a world frozen in time, a drowned landscape that once connected two continents. This is the seabed of ancient Beringia, a place that during the last ice age was alive with human communities, vast herds of animals, winding rivers, a land bridge swallowed when the glaciers melted, buried beneath 50 meters of water. For decades, exploring this world was nearly impossible. The Bering Strait is harsh, ice-choked for much of the years, powerful currents, darkness. But new technology is changing everything. High-resolution sonar, remotely operated underwater vehicles, and slowly, the contours of this lost land are coming back into focus. Ancient river valleys, etched into the seabed, sand ridges marking vanished shorelines, plateaus that may once have been camps, villages, or hunting grounds. Paleontologists believe this was no barren wasteland, it was a patchwork of life. Broad rivers with fish and fresh water, rolling hills where mammoths, bison, and caribou grazed, shrubby thickets for smaller game, and across it all, human bands moving like the herds, following migration routes written into the land. Finding proof of those people, though, is far harder. Saltwater devours organic remains, currents scatter stone tools, bones, ash, and yet, hope remains. Around the world, submerged sites have been found intact. Doggerland in the North Sea, the drowned coasts of Southeast Asia, places where tools, hearths, even plant fibers survive, locked beneath layers of protective sediment. If similar deposits exist here, in Beringia, they could reveal stone tools, fire pits, food remains, the details of how Ice Age people truly lived. Sonar has already hinted at possibilities. In certain areas, long straight lines of stones trace the seabed. Natural formations, perhaps, but maybe hunting blinds, fishing traps, human hands leaving their mark. The patterns fuel debate and imagination in equal measure. And it's not only archaeology, the seabed may also hold the bones of mammoths, bison, and other Ice Age giants. buried in riverbeds, preserved in silt, their DNA still frozen in time, genetic blueprints waiting to be read. Indigenous traditions echo this story. From Alaska to Chukotka, stories recall a time when the sea was narrow, when the lands touched, when people walked across. Some tales describe the sea's advance as sudden, catastrophic, floods sweeping away hunting grounds, driving families inland, memories that may reach back to the very end of the Ice Age. Science, too, turns here for answers. How did the first people reach the Americas? The Beringia standstill hypothesis suggests early humans lived on this land bridge for thousands of years, developing tools, culture, survival strategies, before moving south. If true, the seabed holds a missing chapter in humanity's story. Environmental scientists see more. Sediment cores pulled from the seabed contain pollen, fossils, tiny organisms, clues to Ice Age climates, ecosystems, and how they changed. A record with lessons for us today, in an era of rapid warming and rising seas. But time is running out. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Ice thins, storms intensify, currents grow stronger, and fragile traces of Beringia's past risk being erased before we can even find them. For now, our clearest vision comes through imagination. Artists paint mammoth herds crossing grassy plains where ocean waves roll today. Hunters tracking caribou along riverbanks that now lie 40 meters beneath the surface. Reminders that what we see as a cold, empty strait was once alive, a world of stories waiting beneath the waves. And perhaps, in the silt and shadow, those stories still remain. Waiting for the diver, for the robots, for the day science finally uncovers them. When that day comes, the history of Beringia will no longer be written only on land, but beneath the sea. From here, our journey shifts again, from the silence of the ocean floor to the voices that carried Beringia's memory forward. Indigenous cultures who kept its spirit alive, long after the land bridge vanished beneath the tide. Long after the Bering land bridge vanished beneath the sea, its memory endured, not in maps, not in written records, but in stories, in songs, in traditions kept alive by the indigenous peoples whose ancestors once walked across it. Among the Yupik, the Inupiat, the Chukchi, and others, the tale of a time when the lands touched persists, passed from parent to child, from elder to youth, a living heritage. For these communities, Beringia is not just prehistory, it is homeland, the place where journeys began. For outsiders, such stories were long dismissed as myth, as allegory. But when archaeologists and anthropologists began comparing these oral traditions with science, they found something remarkable: echoes, descriptions of narrowing waters, rising seas, lost hunting grounds. Details that mirror what geology and climate science reveal about the end of the last ice age. Some accounts speak of crossings made on foot across vast plains, where rivers ran and herds roamed. Others tell of the sea rushing in, taking the land, forcing families to move inland, chased by the ocean itself. Different voices, different details. But one theme is constant: the world changed and the people adapted. In some traditions, the land bridge itself is alive, a being that once allowed passage, then withdrew into the sea. This way of seeing land as participant, not backdrop, challenges modern narratives that treat landscapes as static stages. For indigenous cultures, the land has always been in dialogue with its people. Language carries traces of this connection. Across Siberia, Alaska, and even further south in the Americas, certain root words persist. Shared names for tools, for animals, for kin. Whispers of conversations once spoken on Beringia's grassy plains. Material culture holds echoes too. Similarities in clothing, boats, hunting methods, shared knowledge that may reach back before the flooding. Practical wisdom carried forward, because it worked, because it kept people alive. And crucially, this memory is not only ancient. For Chukchi, and Alaskan families, the Bering Strait is still a bridge. Even today, relatives live on opposite shores. Seasonal crossings continued into the 20th century, despite borders and politics. The spirit of Beringia, as a connector of peoples, never truly disappeared. These living traditions also carry knowledge. Science is only beginning to value how to read the ice, how to follow the animals, how to endure in the Arctic's harshest seasons. This wisdom, rooted in generations, shaped by Beringia itself, is increasingly vital as the Arctic faces new upheavals. For archaeologists, these stories are not just heritage, they are guides. Oral traditions pointing towards certain coasts, unusual landforms, submerged places, clues that science alone might overlook. Details about migration, about resources, about sacred animals. Together, story and science form a map richer than either could provide alone. The dialogue is not without difficulty. Centuries of colonization, suppression, and loss have fractured these traditions. Some words faded, some meanings shifted, yet the resilience of the stories is profound. Even when phrasing changes, the truths endure. One Yupik account speaks of a great ice breaking, the sea rushing in, poetic, metaphoric, and yet it aligns closely with what science now calls meltwater pulses, catastrophic floods, at the end of the Ice Age. Events that reshaped the world within a single lifetime. Among the Chukchi, there are stories of a middle land, a place between Asia and America, sometimes reached on ice, sometimes on Earth. Neither one continent nor the other, but both, a liminal space that mirrors exactly what Beringia was, a bridge, a homeland, a world in between. And today, as Arctic ice melts, as coasts erode, as animals change their paths, these stories take on new urgency. For many communities, Beringia is not just memory, it is warning, it is guidance. It is a reminder that worlds can vanish, and new worlds must be built. Now, scientists and indigenous communities are working together, recording stories, comparing them with archaeology, honoring both evidence and experience. Two ways of knowing, woven into one shared narrative, and so, the memory of Beringia is not only preserved, it lives, bridging continents, bridging generations. As we leave the realm of living memory, our journey turns again, back to the deep past, to the final days of the land bridge itself, when Beringia slipped beneath the waves, transforming not only the map but the destiny of two continents. The end of Beringia was not a single moment of collapse, but a slow, relentless drowning, a transformation that unfolded over centuries, yet swift enough to be witnessed by human eyes. In geological terms, it was a blink. In human terms, it was a lifetime of shrinking horizons, vanishing trails, and a creeping sense that the world itself was slipping away. Around 11 to 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age was losing its grip. Vast ice sheets in North America and Eurasia retreated, their frozen walls melting into rivers that poured into the seas. The oceans rose, meter by meter, year by year. For the grassy plains of central Beringia, this meant salt water invading valleys and lowlands. Grazing grounds turned to marsh, marsh to tidal flat to ocean. For those who lived there, the signs were impossible to miss. Shorelines crept inward, hunting grounds drowned, the thunder of caribou herds gave way to the cries of seabirds. Families faced a choice: move inland to the shrinking heart of Beringia, or retreat to the continental coasts of Asia or North America, before the waters claimed everything. Archaeology suggests that during these centuries, Beringia became a broken land, its broad plains reduced to scattered islands, wetlands, and narrow causeways. Travel grew longer, crossings more dangerous, boats became lifelines, seasonal hunters turned seafarers, not by choice, but by necessity, and the seas did not rise evenly. At times, glacial lakes burst. Scientists call them meltwater pulses. For Beringia's people, they would have been remembered as floods of terror. A cape turning into an island. Overnight, the animals changed too. Mammoths, already in decline, vanished. Reindeer and muskox herds retreated north and upward. Seals and whales began to fill the new coasts. For hunters, survival meant new tools, new skills, new ways of life. Culture shifted with the land. Groups once joined by trails were separated by water. Trade routes were severed. Languages that once shared a tongue began to diverge. What was once a bridge of peoples was becoming a boundary, and yet, the hardest change was not physical, it was psychological. To watch your homeland vanish, to see the sea advancing year after year knowing nothing could stop it. The emotional weight of this loss still echoes in indigenous oral traditions, stories of land breaking, of seas rushing in. These were not just metaphors, they were lived experiences. By 8,000 years ago, it was over. The last fragments of dry land between Asia and North America were gone, submerged beneath what we now call the Beringia Strait. Where once lay a highway of life, now surged a narrow, violent channel of water and ice. But the story did not end with loss. The flood also created new beginnings. The newborn coastlines teemed with marine life. The strait itself became a corridor, a place where goods, ideas, and families still crossed, long after the land was gone. In this way, the spirit of Beringia survived, transformed, but unbroken. From a modern perspective, the last days of Beringia are a case study in resilience. They show that survival is not only about technology, but about adaptability, cooperation, and cultural innovation. Lessons we must remember. As seas once again rise around the world, for archaeologists, the loss of Beringia is also a challenge. Its final footprints, hearths and tools, lie hidden beneath the waves, preserved, but locked away, waiting for the day technology allows us to uncover them. And so, in the sweep of history, the submersion of the land bridge stands as a climax, a moment when human lives and planetary change collided. Families chose paths that shaped the destinies of continents. Ecosystems shifted, cultures diverged. The map of the Earth itself was redrawn. And yet, this was not an ending, it was a transformation. Beringia was gone, but its story was not. In the next chapter, we descend into the modern strait, where ice, water, and science converge, where divers, archaeologists, and indigenous knowledge keepers race against time to rediscover the lost world beneath the waves. Today, the Bering Strait is a place of cold, turbulent waters, choked by shifting sea ice in winter, roiled by fierce currents year-round. But beneath these waves lies a drowned world, the grasslands, rivers, and settlements of ancient Beringia, preserved in a dark, frozen vault, untouched for thousands of years. For scientists, this underwater world is one of archaeology's greatest prizes, and one of its greatest challenges. Much of the Bering Land Bridge now lies 50 to 100 meters beneath the sea, its valleys, hills, and ancient rivers buried under silt, sand, and ice. The cold may have preserved bones, tools, even dwellings, but the problem is finding them. The first step is mapping. Research vessels sweep the seafloor with advanced sonar, building 3D models of its contours. Beneath the mud, they find hints of vanished rivers, ridges of long-forgotten hills, shapes that once guided mammoths and people across the land. But mapping is only the beginning. Divers cannot simply descend and dig. The water is too cold, the currents too strong, the visibility near zero, so scientists turn to machines, remotely operated vehicles, autonomous underwater drones with cameras, robotic arms, sediment corers. They go where no human can. The hope is tantalizing. Submerged settlements across Europe, drowned coastlines have revealed hearths, tools, even footprints sealed in mud. Could the same be waiting in the Bering Strait? If so, they could rewrite the story of how the first people entered the Americas. Evidence already points that way. On both the Siberian and Alaskan shores, archaeologists have uncovered tools dating to the very edge of Berengia's final days. It is only logical to assume that more sites lie offshore, buried now beneath the waves. Sediment cores tell their own quiet story. Layers of pollen trace the shift from grassy steppe to tundra to sea. Seeds and spores whisper of vanished plants, and tiny flecks of charcoal hint at human firelight, the last campfires of a disappearing world. The stakes are immense. For decades, scientists debated whether the first Americans traveled through an inland corridor or along a coastal route. Well-preserved Berengian sites could finally settle that debate, but time is running out. Climate change is reshaping the Arctic faster than anywhere on Earth. Retreating ice opens the strait to ship traffic, threatening fragile sites. Erosion eats away at nearby shores, sweeping artifacts into the sea, and as the seabed's permafrost melts, ancient remains may decay, vanishing forever. There is also the matter of politics. The Bering Strait is not only a geographical boundary, it is a border between Russia and the United States. Science here requires diplomacy, permits, and delicate cooperation. In recent years, tensions have slowed progress, but joint efforts continue, often with the guidance of indigenous communities from Alaska and Chukotka. For them, this search is not just academic, it is ancestral. Oral traditions tell of the sea advancing, of land swallowed by water. Stories passed down across generations that mirror exactly what science now reveals. Memory and archaeology converging, each proving the other true. Technology is unlocking new tools, ground-penetrating radar, adapted for the sea, DNA sampling from sediments, high-resolution satellite scans of shifting ice. Most revolutionary of all, environmental DNA. A single water sample can now reveal traces of ancient animals, plants, even humans. A new way to glimpse the people of Beringia without ever lifting a stone. In cinematic terms, this is a story of pursuit, of chasing a vanished world across time and tide. Every sonar sweep, every core of mud, every flake of worked stone lifted from the seabed is a fragment of a puzzle we have only begun to solve. The challenge is immense, but the reward is even greater, a fuller understanding of the migration that shaped the destiny of two continents. And this search is not only about the past, it is also about the present, about the future. For Beringia reminds us coastlines are never fixed, seas rise, land disappears, and the world we know today may one day lie beneath the waves. Just as the people of Beringia adapted to their changing world, so must we, and so the search continues. Scientists scan, they sample, they sift the dark silt of the seafloor. Somewhere beneath these cold waters lies the evidence of an epic human journey, perhaps the most consequential migration in our species' history. The land bridge may be gone, but its story still waits to be told. In our final chapter, we will gather everything we have learned, the geological upheaval, the human odyssey, the enduring mysteries, and reflect on what the story of Beringia means for us today. The lost land bridge is more than ancient history, it is a mirror held up to our own moment in time. The story of Beringia is not locked away in some distant irrelevant past, it reverberates into our present, shaping identities, ecosystems, even the political map of the world. What was once a vast plain of rivers and grasslands is now a strip of ocean, just 85 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. And yet, its influence spans continents and millennia. At the heart of this legacy are people. Millions of indigenous peoples across the Americas trace their ancestral roots to that land bridge, from the First Nations of Canada, to the Inuit of the Arctic, to the Navajo of the Southwest, to the Mapuche of Chile. For them, Beringia is not just a scientific idea, it is an ancestral homeland, a memory, a place where the ice rose in the north, and seas shimmered in the south, a place crossed by families following animals across open plains, guided by stars. These stories are not quaint folklore, they are living records of survival, encoded knowledge of a changing world, passed from generation to generation. The ecosystems of Beringia, too, left their mark. Horses, camels, and saber-toothed cats roamed its plains. Mammoths and bison defined its abundance. Even today, musk oxen and Arctic wildflowers remain as living relics of that vanished world. But Beringia also offers us a warning. Its disappearance beneath rising seas is a reminder that no coastline is permanent, that even the most stable landscapes can vanish within a few lifetimes. For Ice Age peoples, this was both gradual and catastrophic, a slow-motion disaster that forced entire communities to adapt or perish. In that sense, Beringia's story is also our story as we face our own age of melting ice and rising seas. The legacy is political as well. Today, the Beringia Strait is one of the most strategic waterways on Earth, a narrow choke point between Russia and the United States. The same waters that once connected two continents now divide two global powers. And yet, science keeps drawing us back to Beringia. Archaeologists still chase its unanswered questions. Did people cross in a single wave, or many? EBay pass inland through an ice-free corridor, or skirt the Pacific coast by sea? How did they adapt to such a harsh and shifting land? The search always returns to the drowned plains beneath the strait. But Beringia is not just about origins, it is about resilience. The people who crossed it were not wanderers adrift, they were innovative. They made fire in freezing winds, crafted clothing to survive Arctic nights, hunted giants with ingenuity. They endured, and that knowledge of survival, of adaptation still lives in the traditions of Arctic and sub-Arctic peoples today. Culturally, Beringia is a bridge between story and science. Genetics, archaeology, and ecology confirm what indigenous traditions have long preserved, and when placed side by side, each way of knowing deepens the other. Together they transform Beringia from a lost land into a living chapter of human history. For the wider world, the lesson is connection. Long before border, before passports, Asia and North America were one. People moved, traded, mingled, bound not by technology, but by necessity, curiosity, and survival. Beringia challenges us to imagine our own world from the perspective of deep time, to picture New York, Shanghai, or London, submerged and forgotten, waiting for future archaeologists to piece together from fragments. In truth, the land bridge never fully vanished. It lives in the DNA of millions, in the musk ox that still graze the Arctic, in the stories whispered by firelight on long winter nights. The waves may have swallowed its soil, but its imprint endures across two continents, across countless generations. And still, beneath the cold, dark waters of the Beringia Strait, bones, tools, and ancient fire pits remain, silent witnesses to a time when the world was larger and more connected than ever before. The legacy of Beringia is ultimately a mirror. It reflects our origins, our adaptability, our vulnerability. It forces us to see ourselves not as isolated nations, but as the heirs of a shared journey across a vanished plain. It warns us of climate's power to reshape the earth, but it also celebrates our human ability to endure and to imagine what lies beyond the horizon. As our journey comes to a close, we see the full arc of the story, the geological upheaval, the human odyssey, the mysteries still buried beneath the sea. Beringia is gone, and yet, it is still with us, in our genes, in our ecosystems, and in the timeless human impulse to explore. The lost land bridge is not just a relic of prehistory, it is a symbol of connection, of the threads that bind all people, across oceans, across cultures, across time itself, and somewhere, beneath the restless waters of the Beringia Strait, its final secrets still wait to be found. Beringia may belong to the deep past, but its lessons point squarely toward our future. This vanished land bridge is not only a story of ancient migrations, It is a reminder that the forces shaping our world are vast, cyclical, unstoppable. Seas rise and fall, continents drift. Climate shifts in ways that redraw the very map of life. The question is not whether these forces will act again, it is whether we will be ready when they do. Beringia disappeared beneath the waves as the great Ice Age glaciers melted, oceans expanded, coastlines drowned, human geography was transformed forever. And today, it is happening again. The ice is melting, the seas are rising, modern cities teeming with millions stand on shores as vulnerable as those ancient plains once were. Beringia is more than prehistory, it is a case study in adaptation. The people of the Ice Age could not remain still. They moved, they innovated, they learned to survive in new environments. Their survival was no accident, it was resilience, it was cooperation, it was knowledge shared across generations. These same traits will be essential for us in the decades ahead. But Beringia also whispers a deeper truth. Nothing on Earth is truly fixed, not our coastlines, not our nations, not even our cities. In 10,000 years, the map of our world may look as strange to future humans as the Ice Age map looks to us today. And there is a warning here too. Much of Beringia's story is still unknown, hidden beneath the sea, beyond our reach. Without care, our own records may share the same fate. If rising waters erase our archives, our monuments, our cities, what will remain of us? Yet this is not a tale of doom, it is a celebration of human curiosity. That we even know Beringia existed is proof of our ingenuity, our ability to piece together the past through science, through story, through persistence. Archaeologists, geneticists, indigenous knowledge keepers, together they resurrected a world thought lost. This partnership of tradition and science may be the blueprint we need to face tomorrow. Beringia also forces us to rethink borders. Today, the Beringia Strait is a frontier, a dividing line between Russia and the United States. But in the time of Beringia, it was a bridge, a place of connection. And as global challenges cross borders effortlessly, climate, pandemics, scarcity, we may need to return to that ancient truth, that survival depends not on isolation, but on cooperation across lands and culture. Beringia's biodiversity carries lessons too. The interchange of species across its plains forged resilient ecosystems. Horses, camels, mammals, wildflowers. Together they adapted to change. Today, conservation biology looks to such examples, seeking ways to preserve migration corridors, to safeguard genetic diversity, to keep our ecosystems adaptable in the face of disruption. Culturally, Beringia reminds us of the power of story. For thousands of years, knowledge of the crossing was preserved not in books, but in voices. Oral traditions carried survival strategies, environmental memory, and shared identity across the generations. In our digital age, obsessed with archives and servers, Beringia shows us that perhaps the human voice, the act of telling stories, is our most enduring record. And as we imagine the future, Beringia becomes a metaphor for possibility. Just as Ice Age peoples once stood at the edge of a vast unknown continent and chose to cross, we too stand on the brink of uncharted horizons. For them it was new lands beyond the ice. For us it may be the deep oceans, other planets, or the building of sustainable societies that endure the storms of climate change. The courage that carried them across Beringia is the same courage we will need now. In the end, Beringia is more than a land bridge, it is a bridge of time, a link between the deep past and the choices we face today. Those first migrants were not merely survivors, they were innovators, visionaries, pioneers. In that sense, they are not just our ancestors by blood, they are our ancestors in spirit. So when we look across the narrow waters of the Beringia Strait, we should not see only a border, a barrier. We should see the ghost of a land that once united us, a legacy of a journey that still shapes who we are. The tides may have erased Beringia from the map, but its lessons remain etched in our DNA, carried in our stories, written in the restless geology of our planet. The last horizon is never fixed. It is always moving. For the people of Beringia, that horizon was the new world. For us, it is the uncertain future we are about to enter. The question is not whether the horizon will come, it is how we will meet it, and perhaps, in the footsteps of those Ice Age pioneers, we will find our way forward.